Who should you trade for? And which players should you trade away? What's going on, my fantasy freaks? It's Mitch here, back with another week of Buy Low, Sell High on Owner's Box Fantasy. 10 players, 5 buy lows, 5 sell highs. The trades that you need to make entering week 7. Let's begin with the sell high players. These are players on your team that you should try to get rid of. Try to get value right now. You've been waiting for Davante Adams to return to your fantasy lineup, but I'm here to tell you to sell him. I'm here to tell you because I have Davante Adams in one league, and I'm looking to sell Davante Adams. Why? Because everybody knows that Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams have chemistry. Everybody is excited, whether they admit it or not, whether they hate on Aaron Rodgers or not. They will admit that they are excited for the New York Jets and their offense moving forward. And that is universal, which means that a lot of people are going to look at Davante Adams as the Davante Adams that he was in 2020 and that he was in 2021. But I'm here to tell you to use that as an advantage. Use that and spin that into a trade. Try to combine Davante Adams and potentially another player for a big ticket item. You could maybe go get Nico Collins. You could maybe go get a true alpha receiver, Jamar Chase, coming off not his best game. CeeDee Lamb, who's been a little disappointing. There are other wide receivers out there that I think for the rest of the season, especially if they come back from injury like a Nico Collins, will be super effective for your fantasy lineups and set you up better for your fantasy championship, your fantasy playoffs, especially if you're in a good position with your lineup, with your team, with your standings, and your record. So Davante Adams, still a good football player, but the hype is going to be real. It's going to be uncontrollable, and people are going to fall in love with having Davante Adams alongside Aaron Rodgers on their fantasy teams because people want to cheer for that. But they fail to recognize that with Garrett Wilson being a target machine that he is, Breece Hall being a highly targeted running back and a heavy run game alongside Allen Lazard, who's also Rodgers' buddy and gets a ton of targets in his own right, that this is just going to be very difficult for Davante Adams to have wide receiver 1 value. Maybe wide receiver 2 value. That's not within doubt. But Rodgers isn't the same guy he was at MVP powers. The Jets' offense could be really good, but I think it's going to be a thin target share for pretty much every top weapon in this offense. So what has been happening to Garrett Wilson the entire year? He's probably just seen his peak weeks because now he's going to have to split with Davante Adams. And that's why we said sell Garrett Wilson, because Davante Adams could be coming to the team. Now I'm telling you, Garrett Wilson is going to stop Davante Adams from being a top-notch weapon for your fantasy team. So try to spin him now before we even see him play with the team. My second sell high player before week 7. We're going to go with the quarterback, Jared Goff. If there was ever a time to sell high on Jared Goff, it's right now. I mean, this guy just had 153 passer ratings, 2 games in a row, 153, near perfect passer ratings. And why I say sell Jared Goff, he's coming off his 2 most efficient games of the season, probably the 2 most efficient games of his season. He had a great performance against the Dallas Cowboys. In the first 3 weeks, he had 10, 12, and 15 fantasy points. The last 2 games, 25 and 26 fantasy points. At the heart of this offense and the heart of this team, it's always going to be a run-heavy attack. If people are buying into Jared Goff because the quarterback situation across the league and fantasy circles is pretty weak, and people are uncertain about their fantasy position, especially in deeper leagues, I'd use that to my advantage, spin Jared Goff into someone else that maybe down the road has an easier fantasy schedule. There's a chance you could get a Brock Purdy out of Jared Goff. There's a chance you could get CJ Stroud out of Jared Goff. Maybe you have to add something in there, but there's definitely a chance given their recent performance. Buffalo, Chicago, and San Francisco is Jared Goff's fantasy schedule. At San Francisco, at Chicago, 2 outdoor games for Jared Goff, which he usually struggles in. And Buffalo, pretty tough defense. So I look at a really tough upcoming schedule. I look at the peak weeks that he's already had, the run-heavy offense, and I say try to sell Jared Goff while you have the chance. Because otherwise, he might be somebody that in slimmer leagues, you're actually releasing on waivers. So try to get rid of him now before that happens. The third sell-high player in fantasy football right now is Alvin Kamara. Kamara has been the RB1 in PPR this year. And I think that Alvin Kamara is an intriguing sell high because many would argue he's already had his high point. The Dallas Cowboys game, for example, where he had, I think, 41 points. But he still could be probably somebody that is sold based on the prospect of the future of the offense. So Rashid Shaheed is out long-term, perhaps the entire season. Chris Olave currently has a concussion. The offensive line, which is a negative, is currently injured, but maybe could get healthier towards the end of the year. Derek Carr currently injured, but should come back soon. So the way that I see it and others could see it is he might be disappointing right now with Spencer Rattler, but as soon as Derek Carr comes back, he's going to get his same dump-offs, his same reception totals. He's going to get a ton of PPR points. And in PPR, it's more warranted to keep him. In half PPR standard, I'd already be looking to get rid of him. But even in PPR, do you think he's going to finish as the RB1? He's an older running back that's working behind a beat-up offensive line. His rushing efficiency has gone throughout the season down. And Derek Carr is probably somebody that's going to come back, right? Olave is going to come back. Sure, that's great. But I think people and teams are figuring out the Saints offense, the Clint Kubiak approach, a lot of outside zone, a lot of play action. I think they've kind of got a handle on it over the last couple of games, especially the Chiefs. And I feel like Kamara is going to be a guy that started off the season very hot, an older, experienced player, but's going to fade down the stretch. And he's inside an offense on a team that I don't think is situated for success down the stretch of this season. So there is enough prospects down the stretch and enough reasons for people to buy in why they should trade for him. But I think there's definitely reason why you should get rid of him. The offensive line play, the improbable quarterback inconsistency, the overall team that is, I think, just going downhill. So my third sell-high player is still Alvin Kamara as the RB1 right now in PPR. My fourth sell-high player after Week 6, entering Week 7, is Najee Harris. I actually just traded Najee Harris in one of my leagues, and I've been looking to sell him for the past few weeks. But a lot of people wouldn't buy into him until now because he just had the best game of his season. He had a 100-yard game. He had a 20-point affair in PPR, and that's probably going to be one of, if not the best game of his season. He's only had one game above 70 yards, and it was last week against the Raiders. Some people may think the Raiders defense is pretty good, despite them being very lackluster against the run without Christian Wilkins. And so that was a perfect matchup and a perfect situation to play Harris and to get the most out of Harris. Leading in the game, bad offense on the other side, leaning on Najee, not a lot of competition around him, Justin Fields. Now it's a Russell Wilson offense, which might actually lead people to believe that he'll catch the ball more, might lead people to believe that he's going to get more red zone work. That's fine. I do think Jaylen Warren, I do think Cordell Patterson at some point will be more involved. I do think that because Russell Wilson will be under center, I think there's going to be more passing perhaps in this offense. But I look at Najee Harris and say he's coming off his best game. He has an injured offensive line with his center and his best guard out. That's going to hurt his efficiency. Even if he gets a ton of work, which is what you're selling him on, 15 carries a game, that's the selling point. A lot of work. He got a good floor to his game, right? You're going to sell him based on the offense, based on the schedule down the stretch, which is very difficult, based on probably the inefficiency of the running game and the change in quarterback that can run to a quarterback that's more pocket passer centric, which also takes attention away from the defense, right? The attention now is squarely on Najee as the runner. So at number 4, I got Najee Harris. And our 5th and final sell high is Michael Pittman Jr. Now, some people before the season would say this is not a sell high. Michael Pittman having 3 good games in a row, not phenomenal games, but good games in a row, feels like standard Michael Pittman Jr. stuff. But you guys are talking about the Michael Pittman pre-Anthony Richardson, who is the least accurate quarterback in football. With Anthony Richardson, even dating back to last season, Michael Pittman has been a lousy wide receiver in fantasy football. And I don't think people have caught on to this to the degree that smart people have. 31 yards, 21 yards, and 36 yards in the first 3 weeks of Michael Pittman's season this year. 0 touchdowns. With Joe Flacco, 6 catches for 113 yards in the first game, where Flacco entered about halftime. And then he had 2 touchdowns in back-to-back games. So 1 touchdown in back-to-back games, which kind of saved his weeks because he didn't have a ton of yards in either game. Plus, he's a little bit beat up. So Michael Pittman is a guy that's had 3 good games. When you're looking at the box score and you're looking at fantasy points by week, right? You pull up Michael Pittman, it says, 14 points, 15 points. People are just going to see that and be like, oh, he's trending upward. Colts are trending upward. They're starting to win. They're actually not bad. But now Anthony Richardson is coming back, and maybe even some buy into Joe Flacco being the quarterback long-term for them. I don't. I think they're going to try to force Anthony Richardson down our throats until it doesn't work next year. But with Anthony Richardson, this is a run-heavy offense. This is not a pass-efficient offense. And that really lessens the importance of Michael Pittman. Plus, Josh Downs has basically been a better player than Michael Pittman this year. They've got Mitchell to throw to, Alec Pierce to throw to. There's just generally more competition for Pittman this year. Even if Joe Flacco is there, he's actually been preferring Josh Downs. So Pittman is definitely somebody I would look to sell, even for like relatively cheap. Now let's move to the buy low list, beginning with a quarterback. Somebody that I think you could sell Jared Goff, get maybe an asset plus this player, Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams. Matthew Stafford is a great buy low if you need a quarterback, because even if he's on the waiver wire, I'd pick him up. Puka Nacua is coming back. Cooper Kupp is actually returning against the Raiders, which is huge, right? Stafford is still very good at football. His problem has been that he has no wide receivers to throw to, and his offensive line has been lousy. But the offensive line has been getting healthier. The defense has been getting healthier. They're coming off a bye, which means Sean McVay will have had a full week to study the offense, what's working, what's not working, operate from that vantage point, adjust to the new personnel, and then you add his good old reliable receiver, Cooper Kupp, and then Puka's coming back in a couple weeks. You've all of a sudden got a top 10 offense in the NFL that doesn't have a great defense, that's going to be in a lot of shootouts, and that's a lot of good passing statistics, okay? So Matthew Stafford being very good at football is still a buy for me. He plays teams like Seattle 2 times, not very good defenses, but good offenses. Miami, not a great defense, but a good offense when healthy. The Patriots, just a generally bad team. The Eagles, a good offense, bad defense. Saints, not a great defense, as we saw against the Bucs and the Chiefs. The Bills, really good offense, not the best matchup, but still, like, you're going to have to score there. The Niners, who we did light up earlier this year in a come-from-behind mode. The Jets, who are a little bit overrated defensively and could be pretty good offensively. And then the Cardinals. So even his schedule is pretty light, and I don't feel there's a game there where I'd really look to sit him outright unless I had a better alternative. So he's pretty safe as well. He has a pretty high floor. So I could see the Rams taking a pretty big stride towards being a dark horse. Maybe they could push for a playoff spot, even though they've started the season 1-4, because they're going to get healthier here. My number 2 buy low is Ramondre Stevenson. Ramondre is a great running back to buy right now because I think the Patriots offense is going to be very underrated entering week 7 because Drake May has made them watchable. Drake May has made them productive. Drake May has made them actually half decent. Like, they played well against the Texans. They scored 21 points and they could have scored more. And Drake May was the first quarterback to throw for over 200 yards against the Texans, who's led the NFL in pressure rate, who's been a pretty good defense this year. And Drake May looks to be pretty explosive as an athlete, can really throw the ball. I was a huge fan of him coming out, and I am biased. I'm a Pats fan. But Stevenson was the only guy doing anything in the offense previous to Drake May. He had 3 out of 5 pretty strong games, like definitely startable, like RB1 caliber performances, 3 out of the 5 games. And that was with Jacoby Brissett, who was doing nothing for the offense. With Drake May, that's just going to make the offense more productive, more explosive, more exciting, more points. And honestly, right now, the Patriots defense looks pretty like average to mediocre, which means that offenses are going to be able to move the ball on them and score, which also leads to garbage time points and things that the Patriots really haven't had the last 2 years when they've been bad. They just haven't had a bad defense. They've had actually a very good defense, which has made them even less fantasy reliant or reliable, because even in like games where they're losing, they're still close. They just can't score any points. With Drake May, they've got an explosive talent at quarterback that's going to lead to red zone touches. He's going to throw the ball to Stevenson out of the backfield quickly because of the offensive line. They've actually ran the ball half decent all year. So Stevenson is a great buy right now because he is currently injured, but I think it's very short term. So he's somebody that I would look to add on my team, especially if that owner needs somebody right now. If I could somehow swap Najee Harris for Ramondre Stevenson, or even give like Jared Goff and Najee Harris for Ramondre Stevenson, something like that, I would look to do that because maybe that owner needs a player right now. If Stevenson's out this weekend, has been out last weekend, maybe he's frustrated. Pick up Stevenson for the future of your team and then thrive, because Drake May is going to really allow this team to thrive offensively. My third buy low for week 7 is Mike Evans, who's currently the wide receiver 14 in fantasy. Evans is always a buy low after a Saints game. That is a like locked and loaded rule. Like it's in the Mitch rule book. It's rule number 13. Mike Evans, trade for him after a Saints game. So far this season, he's had 3 awesome games in which he scored 1 or more touchdowns, and he's had 3 bad games. I believe 2 of those games, he actually had 2 touchdowns. But what I love about Evans, first of all, is Baker Mayfield's playing exceptional football. The offense is very, very good. They pass the ball at a high rate. And their defense is kind of okay, but it's not great. And their weakness is against the pass, which leads to shootouts. Lastly, the fantasy playoffs. He plays the Chargers, the Cowboys, and the Panthers in the fantasy playoffs. 3 like mediocre to bad defenses. The Chargers don't have a great secondary. I can't see them covering Mike Evans. The Cowboys give up 40 points a game right now, and the Panthers are just putrid, the worst defense in the league, and Evans owns them. So if I could get Mike Evans for that stretch at the end of my season for the fantasy playoffs, I'm already looking early for that. That's beautiful. So he might be worth it just for that, and you might have to pay up for him a little bit because he's Mike Evans and people know he'll bounce back. But maybe the owner is not doing so well right now because he's been a little inconsistent, and they know that, and they're willing to get rid of him, understanding that he's been inconsistent. But I'm here to tell you that things looking better moving forward, and it's in a very good offense. I just trust Mike Evans. The fourth buy low for week 7 is Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, unlike Mike Evans, Marvin Harrison Jr. does have a fairly difficult schedule coming up, but in the fantasy playoffs, he does have great matchups. He plays the Patriots at home, who are just a bad team, although they do have Christian Gonzalez. Then he plays, more importantly, the Panthers and the Rams in the final 2 weeks of the fantasy playoffs. So that's beautiful. But Harrison's interesting because he's a rookie who has not lived up to expectations. He had a very high expectation entering the NFL. He was a very high draft pick. He was seen as a generational receiver. And the fact that all those things really align, people just generally dislike that type of person. They dislike the silver spoon person, Marvin Harrison Jr., right? There's a lot to dislike there, especially if you drafted him and he hasn't been playing well. That's just general psyche, okay? But secondly, he had a horrible week 1, which I still think plays in the minds of their owners. He was bad in week 5 against the Niners, who have very good matchups for Marvin Harrison and have done well against Kyler in the past, like Charvarius Ward, who's a physical big cornerback, and then a concussion in week 6, which forced him out of the game. But he had excellent week 2 to week 4 stretch where he was one of the best receivers in fantasy, which showcases he can get it done at a high level in the NFL. So he might be out in week 7. If you see that he's out in week 7, use it to your advantage. He has a concussion, so he should be back relatively soon, like week 8, week 9 at the very least. So if you have a chance to use that to your advantage, try to play into the narrative of Marvin Harrison so far being a bust and go out there and capitalize off a couple of weak weeks from Marvin Harrison Jr. and expect more of the week 2 through 4 stretch, especially when it comes to the fantasy playoffs. Marvin Harrison Jr. and Mike Evans will likely be 2 of the better receivers in fantasy during the fantasy playoffs as long as they stay healthy. The 5th and final buy low target is 2 players, the Miami wide receivers, Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle is obviously more affordable and likely you can get him. I actually traded for him in part with that Najee Harris trade. So Jalen Waddle was involved there and he was one of the guys I wanted to target because of the situation that owner was in and also because I think he's very good at football and Tua is going to be back soon. So Tua probably will be returning in week 9 or so, which I think is about right. They play the Bills. It's a huge game. The Dolphins still have reason to go for it this year. The AFC wildcard picture is relatively weak, and Miami has a lot of talent, and they've loaded up in order to make some sort of run. Their division is still kind of open, although the Bills are starting to separate. But if they could beat the Bills, that would be huge for their season. With Tua, this is an explosive offense that can score in a hurry, and those 2 guys have been awesome with Tua throughout their careers in this offense. They are by far the 2 best players on their offense and 2 of their best players on their team, and they're heavily targeted and very consistent. Tyreek Hill is obvious, but Jalen Waddle does really feel like the guy that is easier to get. Some people might trade to Tyreek Hill if they believe Tua is going to be out longer than you think, or if they're just in a really bad spot and they need to trade him because they need somebody right now that's going to be more productive and more reliable. So you could use that to your advantage. But Jalen Waddle is probably more widely available. When looking at the schedule for Miami, there's some good moments. Rams, Raiders, Patriots aren't terrible matchups. Then they play some pretty good teams like the Packers and the Texans and the Niners, but all have good offenses. So Miami should have to push the ball there. And they play the Jets twice and the Browns, who could just quit at that point. So I think Waddle is the one to go for more often than not. But if you could get Tyreek is pretty much startable when Tua is in there at a high level, like wide receiver 1 level when Tua is playing, no matter the opponent. So yeah, Miami wide receivers for obvious reasons. Go get them right now before Tua comes back, and thrive when Tua is in there, because this offense is just totally different in terms of the plays they actually call, the rhythm, the sequencing, the explosiveness, and their wide receivers just have much more confidence and they play just with a lot more passion and heart. Those are my buy lows. Those are my sell highs entering week 7 of the 2024 NFL season. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, Gronk spike the like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more. It's Mitch. Deuces.